Good evening, welcome, and hello to Moesif's monthly meetup, talking about all things API and product management. We're coming to you from the heart of Techland, San Francisco, California, and I am Larry Ebringer, the CMO of Moesif, and your host today. Joining me is Steve Forte, wow, from Fresco Capital, and he's going to share with us how to grow developer-first companies. You might not know this, but Steve is an FOM. And an FOM does not stand for a front office manager. It stands for a friend of Moesif. Steve invested in Moesif in our seed round almost 4 years ago now. So thank you for that, Steve.
Sure thing.
And welcome. Where in the world did you come from?
Yes, I came from Menlo Park today. So happy to come up here. We're going to share one mic. Is that how we're doing it?
We're going to share one.
We can do it.
This is for the recording for the thousands of people on YouTube, or millions who are going to watch it later.
Maybe billions.
Potentially. So Steve has had a very storied career. He used to be the CTO of Zagat, the restaurant guide book company. He worked in Microsoft for a decade in partnerships. He then went on and was a founder, I think, or a very early employee of Telerik, and ran, which is a mobile dev and headless CMS company, and ran all strategy there, and managed to build up the developer community of that company to 1.5 million developers before it was eventually bought by Progress Software. He then went on to the dark side in 2014 and started Fresco Capital, a venture capital firm. We won't hold that against him.
Please don't.
Okay. His notable investments are Pipedrive, which I've used before. It's a sales automation tool, which had a $1.5 billion IPO. Spire Global, which is a micro satellite company that went through a SPAC last year. General Assembly, which I've gone to. It's an ed tech company that has 3,500 employees.
Kind of invented the co-work space.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Then they pivoted to online education. They realized co-working space was a bad business.
Right. Yeah, probably very good timing to get out of co-working. And then finally, MakeBlock, which is a STEM product company that has 100 million in revenue or thereabouts. So my first two questions to you, Steve, are: what restaurants should I eat at? And how can our audience here join the Billionaires Club?
All right.
Since you're a VC. So, AKA, another way of saying, what's the path to a good meal and having your own G7?
Okay. G7. Well, hi, everyone. It's a hard introduction to kind of walk into, but to answer the questions is I have a secret ninja skill of going out to eat, which my wife my wife will never watch this on YouTube, so I can say it. I actually joke that if my wife figured this out, she wouldn't need me anymore. I actually just go on Google Maps and start clicking on the pictures of the places. And I rely on Gen Z who takes pictures of food, right? So I just go in and look at the pictures. So to be honest, that's how you do it. But if you want to do the traditional old boomer way and go on Open Table and stuff like that, anything Danny Meyer. He was really good to us. He's a New Yorker at Zagat when we were doing things. At Zagat, our busy season was Christmas time, or the holiday season. So we used to do our holiday party in August, and we used to always host it at a Danny Meyer restaurant. He's, of course, went on to fame with Shake Shack and things like that. But any Danny Meyer restaurant, he's a special place in our heart. He took care of us when we were nobodies. So. And now he's, of course, big and famous and all that fun stuff. And how do you become a billionaire?
Yeah, so
easy.
Right, so it's 44 people in San Francisco are billionaires.
Only
I looked
44.
it up. We're number 9 in the pecking order of cities around the world.
I think there's more than that in Atherton.
Probably, right. Probably now, right. So how do you get a G7?
Well, there's a couple ways you can do it. The first is you can start with 200 billion and then buy a social media company. And run it into the ground, and then you can be left over with about $1 billion. So that's probably the easiest way to become a billionaire. Okay. The other way is I've always told people that ask questions. I've done a lot of work at colleges. They go, how do you make a lot of money or whatever? And unless you're going to be like Ronaldo and have $100 million a year contract, or a trader at Goldman Sachs, you have to have equity in a company, right? So I feel like if everyone's here you're probably involved in some kind of tech startup or tech company that probably values some form of equity or stock options. Like that's the way you make it upsize, where you share in the economics of the upside, whether it's in profit sharing, whether it's in stock options, or if it's in crypto, whether it's you're part of the DAO and then that DAO pays dividends or tokens or airdrops. Like whenever there's an upside where your interests are aligned with the interests of everybody, right, including your investors, the dark side, as you like to call it.
So no Dogecoin, no.
If you want, this is not investment advice. I've been advised by the SEC to say that. I just buy Ethereum. Like it is like the index. Ethereum is like the index fund for all of DeFi, right? Because everything's built on top of Ethereum. So if you just hold a lot of Ethereum, like if you would have bought all the pancake swaps and the Uniswap, well, pancake swaps, Binance, but if you would have bought Uniswap and all the DeFi summer stuff when the DeFi summer hit and held it, or if you just would have bought Ethereum and held it, you'd be better off today with just the Ethereum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Salient, very, very pertinent tips there.
VCs are boring. We take portfolio approaches, right?
Right. But it sounds like you park
Like my
everything
stock
in Ethereum.
portfolio is like S&P tracking or emerging market tracking. Yeah, boring.
Right. And Ethereum.
Yeah, we were talking about boring. I like everything boring.
Okay, the boring company. Right. So you've
Except
now,
Moesif.
of course. So
Moesif's exciting.
right. So
KPIs.
changing gears a little bit. We're getting a little bit more serious now. So you've been a dev. You've done dev partnerships. You've sold to devs. You've invested in devs, Pipedrive amongst them. So I think you're uniquely qualified to answer the topic of tonight's meetup, which is what's the best strategy for building an org to sell to devs? So maybe what we should do is cover what you did at Telerik, how you built up the company to 1.5 million developers. What was the ecosystem you drove there? I know we talked a little bit, we talked a little bit earlier about your top-down, bottoms-up approach. So why
Let me
don't
talk about that.
I'd like to talk about that. I think it's very pertinent.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. And one thing you got wrong in my bio, I didn't actually work at Microsoft. I was what's called a regional director. It looks like I worked. So everyone makes the mistake. So it was actually part of a partnership program. And what was interesting, it was their developer outreach program. So it was called the Microsoft Regional Director Program. I didn't have a region. I didn't direct anything, right? However, I was their representative, and I used to say I was an unpaid evangelist at Microsoft. And I did that for about 10 years in my spare time, right? So that was literally like just what I did. This is before influencers, right? So this is back in the 90s and early 2000s, before Instagrammers take pictures of themselves at pools, right? So we were the OG influencers, right? And I learned from the best. I mean, I know Microsoft sometimes is a four-letter word, but at one point in the early 2000s, when Microsoft was, evil and Silicon Valley was like, you worked at Microsoft, go back. The only job you can get in Silicon Valley, because they pay you like $1 gazillion, was head of evangelism, head of DevRel, like head of any type of developer relations, any type of developer, because that was the one thing that everyone respected that they did right. So I learned from there. So I'm kind of taking a page from the playbook there. And if it looks familiar, it's because the big companies in Silicon Valley, Google hired a guy named Vic, who ran the DPE division at Microsoft, called Developer Platform Evangelism. And Facebook hired a guy named Doug Purdy, who was the president of the developer division at Microsoft, to run their developer outreach when they were starting to build their tools. I can go on and on, but you get the point, right? So like at every single successful Silicon Valley company, that's like the old 2.0 companies, right? The ones from the last generation, the Web 2, I guess, is the lingo we would use today, like Twitter, Facebook. Twitter had a guy named Sandquist. I forget. I didn't like that guy as much. If Mr. Sandquist is listening, you can edit that part. I actually don't really care if he knows
We'll
that.
put someone else's name.
He was a bit of a blowhard, so I don't really care if he listens to this YouTube or not. I might actually tweet it, because apparently you do that now. You tweet insults to people, and it's totally acceptable. So
Is that a path to becoming a billionaire?
it's a part of it's. But you have to remember, you have to start with
200 billion.
200. Okay.
You start with 200 billion, and then you buy Twitter, right? And then just tweet about whatever, Vladimir Putin or something. So in essence, when we got to Telerik, I spent about 10 years in that developer ecosystem as a developer, as a co-founder of two other startups. One was Zagat, which we did sell to Google, so it was ironic, right? But Google didn't yet have Vic in charge of developer relations. It was a little early in that game, so Google was kind of clueless when it came to developer outreach because they were just too busy being an ad machine, right? It wasn't until later when they started hiring a lot of these Microsoft people, we were already gone. And then I built another company that was in the ad tech space, and another boring kind of company, but this is in the early 2000s, and we measured a lot of ad work. And I was part, again, as I always was part of that Microsoft ecosystem. So by the time we founded Telerik, we really had to go figure out how to talk to these developers. And it really is straightforward. If you're building a dev-first kind of ecosystem, you really have to build the ecosystem. And you can't say, well, I'm just going to go throw some parties, give out some swag, or the crypto environment, do some airdrops and give people some money, or whatever environment you're in. You can't just drop things on developers and then expect there to be loyalty. There has to be value back, right? So all the developers in the room, are probably shaking their head like, I'm not going to go listen to, someone's content or read their content on a blog or go to their conferences if it's not valuable. So in essence, you truly have to build a community first, and the way you do that is a lot of giving. And I think I mentioned this on the call this morning. Our Bible.
Not swag. Don't give.
Oh no! Hold on a second.
Okay.
No, there's always swag. You always have to give out swag. I mean, the swag is always an important component.
Okay.
It's just you don't lead with the swag. I mean, you could lead with the swag, sure, to get people in a room. If you said, "Hey, we're giving away super cool rock star hoodies tonight."
Right. We're giving away T-shirts at the back, everyone. So all the devs in the room. Take the T-shirt to go.
If they knew that in advance, that you might have had 10% more people. Because
Well,
by leading, they might have taken the T-shirt and left. Yeah, that's true. Especially after listening to me drone on about T-shirts, right? Like, just give me the T-shirt. So we would go so we had to do this from scratch, and we thought we had great products. And I actually do think they were great products because we were really bad at sales and marketing, and the products did kind of sell themselves because we must have went through I don't know, I lost track of the heads of sales and the heads of marketing. It was a revolving door. Eventually, we after about 4 or 5 years, we figured it out. But what we did is we focused taking that Microsoft regional director approach, and we found people in certain areas. So we sponsored lots of meetups like this and user groups and things like that were talking about whatever technology we were in. It's a very similar model, just to engage with we didn't want anything in return. We just wanted to engage with developers. And so what we did is we kind of took a page, or literally just the whole book. Gary Vee, who I'm not the biggest fan of Gary Vee, unless you're listening, Gary. But he had the book Jab, 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 Right Hook. And what it basically means is, like the boxer does, the jab, 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 jab. It's and then well, I'm doing it backwards, but the video will see it the
right way around.
Yeah, the right way. I did it solely for the sake of Gary watching it on YouTube later. And the jab, 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 right hook says, provide the majority of your content as literally a benevolent thing to build a community, right? So whether it's blog posts, you don't even mention your company. So I would go speak at conferences, and the name of the company, as Larry said, was called Telerik. And the only time you would hear the word Telerik, even if I was at a conference that did something that we had this amazing product for, was just on the slide that said, "Hi, I'm Steve, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Telerik." And then I go to the next slide, right? That was the only time you heard the word Telerik, right? Now, the right hook was, we might have had a booth. If it was a big conference, we might have had a booth, or we might have had a banner at the keynote, or one of those vendor sessions, which aren't usually that good, right? But we would have some type of right hook too. But we might also have 4 or 5 people just speaking at the conference, just as subject matter experts. Literally, and what was interesting is Telerik, our first components that we sold were UX tools. My grandfather was an artist by trade, did not inherit any of those skills. I was a database guy, so I was working on the ORM tool and all the other types of things. So I was speaking at some of these SQL conferences or NoSQL conferences, whatever, these data-driven conferences. And I work at a company that sells UX components. And one guy even asked me, he goes, "Why do you work at a company with UX components?" Right? He goes, "It's great that you're coming here and they're paying you your way." So that's the first way, is you build that developer community, and you do it by giving into that community and actually engaging in the community and actually having a head count. If you really want to get super technical, you actually have a head count of people whose sole job it is that you measure their productivity on their reach. Right? How many developers did they reach that month, and what are the metrics? What are the reach points? Was it blog post? Was it in person? And then of course you start diving down to the quality of that reach.
So let's jump into that a minute. So when you went to the DBS, the database conference, and you talked about UX,
And people
I didn't talk about US, I talked about databases.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, again, developer community. I just need developers to like us,
But
right?
why, when you drill down, were they relevant? Let's say you've got, 100 people who signed up.
Let me ask you this question. Who here in the audience is a developer? Okay, like almost the whole audience.
Yeah.
Okay, how many people, raise your hand if you've built an application with no data? Oh, see, for Gary V watching on YouTube, that is 0. Everyone has built an application with data, right? So if I'm speaking at a developer conference for data people, ultimately they're going to work on a team that's going to need UX components. And we were doing the R&D, like we were going to build a data product, right? So we had a data product in the pipeline, which I was in charge of, right? So ultimately, it wasn't like I was just going to this conference willy-nilly. Like there was definitely some strategy behind it. So we created personas, and we actually copied the personas of some of the bigger tech companies. And what I mean by a persona is like we segmented the market. A type of developer at a certain like entry-level developer, this type of developer, and then like one type of developer that might be we targeted a certain persona. So we would target conferences that had the persona, and we didn't care about the technology, because we used to joke that we were going to build for everything. Like if there was whatever kind of coding runtime, whatever it is, we're going to go build a tool for it. So we would just cover every kind of tech conference, but I had to target those personas, because I remember when I was training. I remember I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and we were opening up our India office, which I know we want to talk about the top down, bottoms up. We'll get to that in a second. It was one of those rare moments. I used to travel a lot, and my passport was full, and I went to the U.S. Embassy to get a new passport, and it was during one of those government, there's all Americans in the room. Like, remember when our government used to shut down all the time because the parties were fighting with each other? So during one of those shutdowns, and there's real consequences for an expat. Because I can't, my passport was locked in the United States consulate in Hong Kong, and I couldn't get it because it wasn't deemed essential, right? So this government was shut down. It was pretty sad. So I had to make them come from India to Hong Kong. I had a couple guys come in, and when I was training them and talking about because they thought it was the dream job. You mean I get to go speak at conferences and user groups and blog and write code all the time? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I said, yeah. And they said, what about selling our tools? I go, we have salespeople for that. I go, just go out and engage. But what I said to them is I said, you need to talk to the organizer of the event. You can't just go to your friend's event that's going to have, they were called Mort, Elvis, and Einstein were the personas. We stole those from Microsoft. And you can Google it. There's a good history to those 3 personas. I go, we sell to Mort and Elvis. So if you're at a conference of just Einsteins, like you might as well stay home. Like you're not talking to people like we want in our developer community. We want a developer community of all the Morts and the
Who's
and the
Mort?
Elvises.
I know Elvis.
Mort is your Google coder. I write one line of code, I don't know what to do next, and then I go to Google, then I copy and paste, and then it works until it doesn't, because it's like calling a routine that's actually on the hard drive of the developer who wrote it. There's no C:// super cool routine, : right? So that's Mort. Mort is your entry level, does a lot of copy and pasting, uses a lot of tools. We sold to Mort all the time because we had code completion, we had all those kind of code analysis tools, all that great stuff, right? So Mort loved us, and we loved Mort. But Elvis was where the money was, because Elvis was the serious developer. Like Elvis is a serious developer, probably like all the folks in the room are all Elvises. Einstein was like, the Gary V. No offense, Gary. Or Ray Sandquist. Remember him, right? The first guy insulted. Just the blowhard, like I'm cooler. I have 3 PhDs, and I'm going to over-engineer this, and I need to write 72 layers of security code, but I'm going to quick a little backdoor for myself, and the password will be password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But right, just to fix bugs, on the weekends. Right, and leave port 1033 open, and things like that, right? But
just going back to Elvis for a minute.
Yeah, we loved Elvis.
Why?
Elvis has left the building.
So that was the derivation of Elvis. It's Elvis has left the building. It's nothing to do with like fried banana.
I have no idea. Like we literally stole. These were Microsoft's market segmentation. They even had one called Tim, which was like even before. But I don't think Tim was a developer. I think that was someone just using like what we would call today no-code tools. But we didn't make no-code tools. It wasn't sexy back then. Maybe today, if we existed, we would have made no-code tools. But I'm not a firm believer in no-code. I see like things like Airtable reminds me of like Microsoft Access or FileMaker Pro, or like eventually you're going to replace it with something that has code. But ultimately so all this giving to the developers isn't out of benevolence, right? There's a corporate strategy about giving to these developers. So then that's kind of how you get started. And depending on the size and scope of your company, the size and scope of your budget, you are of course going to make that investment, and you're going to make the investment as deemed appropriate by yourself and your team, and of course your budget's going to constrain you and dictate some things you can and can't do. Then you start layering, as I said, those are the jabs. And then you start layering the right hooks, which is at these conferences, you'll have a booth and you'll give out t-shirts. And then, of course, people start saying, well, what's Telerik? Like, we make really cool t-shirts, by the way. Like, we, if you remember .NET, like the Microsoft .NET, so our logo was the .NET Ninja. And we had the .NET Ninja everywhere, right? And I still actually have one of these t-shirts. Now it's my nightgown shirt, or my pajama shirt. And my 6-year-old daughter loves it. She's like, oh, wow, you have a ninja. It's probably a 10-year-old shirt with holes in it and stuff. But I refuse to let it go because it's part of the past. And we would give out the .NET Ninja t-shirts, hats, stuffed animals, squishy ball, all the swag. Right? Stickers, everything. And then that started getting people in, because then you layer on top of all your benevolence massively awesome documentation and sample of everything you do, right? From every possible case study. So what we did, and the developers in the room are now going to all get up and walk out. I made a prediction, right? Is we had no customer support. So in essence, every developer just answered all the tickets. Right, so I thought, and we always would hire these fancy people from fancy companies as we grew big and took more venture capital and grew more. And they would come in, they'd go, oh, we used to Microsoft, we have PSS1 and PSS2 and PSS. I'm like, that's great, but we're going to have our developers answer all the tickets, right? And this was the way, in my view, to get the developers to have a little more ownership in the code, because no matter what you do, there's going to be bugs, right? There's misinterpretations of requirements. There's a million reasons why there's bugs, right? I'm not stupid. I know there's going to be lots of bugs. But if the developers are closing these tickets, they're actually seeing what customers are doing with our products. So that was still a level, that was one of the reasons people loved us, because they would enter a ticket, and then developers would answer the question. And a lot of times it was more of a philosophical question than an actual bug, right? So then we had our knowledge base, we had our videos. For almost every time we had a unique question case study. How do you do this and sort this grid or do that, blah, blah, blah. We would, make a blog and a video and sample code that's downloadable in all the languages we support, right? If it's JavaScript or if it's C++, C#, whatever the language is that particular tool supports, there's just like a tab. Some of the tabs as the years go, I would have like 5, 6, 7, 8 different languages. But by having such an extensive library of the demos, but they were demos that not were just like the boring hello world, or how do you connect to a backend database, or how do you make like an asynchronous call over here, right? They were actually just like, imagine you were working on a stockbroker floor and you need real-time stock quotes. Here's how you do it with these tools, blah, 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 right? So that was that next level. So, granted, a lot of our customers, of course, had more unique use cases that we didn't know about, but the basic building blocks of an application were already there for them. And there were frameworks that we didn't charge for in the sample code that you can download and get started, right? So then people would just plug those into, and then of course, so that was like one level above the regular like documentation that you have. So you have to have like really great documentation, but then really great samples on top of it. Every time we released a new product, we did what we called the 101 example, meaning is you would download like a little project and had 101 sample projects. And that was the hello world, but it was all the basics of how do you connect to it, especially if it was new technology. How do you connect to a database? How do you do this? How do you do that? So this is what I call the bottoms-up approach, right? So this is all of the developer engagement. We would go in and give all these samples. So of course, if we reached developers at the conferences, then we did all your traditional marketing. So like we sponsored a Stack Overflow channel. So I always would tell people when I was pitching venture capitalists, I said, well, what do you do for customer acquisition? I said, well, somebody is coding away and they can't sort on odd number days. Anyone run into a bug like that? Because that's great, right? Something weird like that, something super, super specific. So they go to Stack Overflow. We know we have a tool that solves it. So we would sponsor the thread on Stack Overflow, but people started getting proactive over the years and say, oh, you should just use Telerik. And then it would go, what's a Telerik? Right? They don't even know that we existed. And then, of course, there's like a million, Google was good and all that, like a million things they can click on. They click, they download the 30-day trial, they see these videos, right? They go to a conference later and get a hat. But in essence, when the 30-day trial is over, the little screen pops up that says, hey, pay us money. They go, boss, here, this saved me 3 days worth of work, pay for this. And we priced it to a point where we knew that a manager could put it right on their credit card, or they could, we priced it where we knew how much, we knew after doing this for a few years how much spend there was, so we priced it to the point where a manager could probably buy it for a team of 5 without having to like get a lot of permissions and things like that. So that was kind of the bottoms up, right? So we built the community, we found the developers, we were proactive in anticipating the problems that they were going to have with the existing technologies that our tools filled. We evangelized the crap out of that, right? So like it's hard to then Google us and not find someone who either worked at the company or was a partner of the company talking about one of our tools solving that particular problem with literally 101 examples of code. And then we would turn around and when we, as I said, we were really bad at sales and marketing, but we actually got really good at it as this process started. And I don't know if this is a normal business. I went to business school. No one ever taught it. So I guess maybe we made it up. But I used to call it bottoms up and top down. So that was the bottoms up approach. It's just, developer community, developer evangelism. The top down is exactly what you would think. It was the marketing towards the decision makers, the suits, the managers, the Dilbert pointy-haired guys. Do you guys know Dilbert? Is Dilbert still around?
He's probably, I know he says very inappropriate things on Twitter.
He does?
Yeah,
Oh, it's so
not
sad.
good.
Oh man, he's like went to the dark side. Oh, poor thing. Dilbert used to be a lot of fun.
Right.
Yeah, I think everything's ruined now. No, can't have fun anymore. So, all right, we won't talk about Dilbert anymore.
No,
Dilbert. Strike that from the record.
Yeah. I'll cut it out.
Cut it out. Now they're like, what are they cutting out? We want to know the original. hashtag cancel Dilbert. So ultimately is we would come in with your traditional marketing collateral, your traditional sales collateral to the managers, right? So we would just bombard them the way you would normally bombard them with an enterprise sales team. Volume pricing, all the stuff you would think. We just, eventually when we got a little money, we figured out, the right people to hire that did this for a living and like stole them from the big enterprise places like SAP and, all those kind of places, And the way that we did it though, of course, as you can imagine, the difference that you have by selling a big tool like SAP, and I have some choice words for SAP, which you can get me really offline because it'd be fun. SAP is like, I don't know, like $1 million product, and you don't get a 30-day free trial of SAP, and you don't really evangelize SAP to developers at conferences. You don't have the SAP.NET Ninja. So when you're going and selling SAP to an organization, you're basically selling them on the value proposition. And SAP is a hard product to sell. So by hiring folks like that to come sell a product that the tool was already in use in the organization, right? So we would go into an organization that might be paying us $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000 a year already, and we say, well, buy a $2 million enterprise license and use it across your entire organization, and they're like, ooh, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? So that was the playbook. That's the top down, the bottom up. So we never asked the developers to go sell it to their boss or anyone in their organization. We just asked them to use it. And we had free versions, and sometimes we went into organizations and said, hey, I remember in India, we had a lot of people using the free trials, and they just kept extending it with new Hotmail accounts and things like that. And we would go into them and say, here's like 50,000, like literally 50,000 registered accounts, in your organization. Why don't you actually pay us some money and unlock all the extra million cool features, right? And get the support and all the other kind of fun stuff, right? So.
And they said no.
No, they actually said yes.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, one of them said no, said we'll build it. They came back a year later and said yes. Yeah. But ultimately, so you don't even have to have the people paying for it, right? Like at some point, if you have like a freemium model or a free trial, things like that. So that's how you build it, and that's how you kind of then start selling. And that actually is kind of soup to nuts how it works. So I'm going to hand the mic back to you.
That is a fire hose of information
Yeah.
that we're all very, very pleased to hear about. I suppose my big takeaway is it's a combination of freemium land and expand, combined with some really good golf players who can go to SAP, play golf, drink a lot of whiskey in Vegas, and close the $2 million deal.
You got it.
I vote Derek, CEO. I vote for playing the golf and drinking the whiskey.
Me too.
Oh, and Nigel, the sales guy, he's also on board. Although
Derek's
I know he doesn't
Derek's
play golf.
definitely doing the demos with the developers.
Yes.
Yeah, Derek actually does do the demos.
I know.
All right. Okay, well, that was a very insightful perspective on Telerik and how you got to 1.5 million developers. I do take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt that you had 20,000 people using Hotmail accounts, and you actually went to them and said, you could actually pay for this and unlock more features, and they did.
Well, it took a while, and actually we went in through a completely different route. So if you want to know the detail on that company, it was a company called CSC, I think they were called in India, a big outsourcing firm. And I always knew the scale and scope of developers in India, and we had an automated testing product. So it was a record and playback, right? So it was I forget, I think Smart Bear was a competitor. So we acquired the company and rolled it into our portfolio, but it was a very different product to sell. So this could be a whole MBA class that you didn't sign up for tonight, so I won't go into like the mistakes we made, because we made them all multiple times. However, we went to India to go and sell to companies that had a lot of...
Hotmail accounts.
Not Hotmail accounts, testers.
Testers.
And in India, these outsourcing companies, it was like, this is back around like 2010, 2011. It was terminals, like with different configurations. It was, maybe a Mac, like you were testing, if you were testing, a Mac with Firefox, and then it was a Mac with Internet Explorer. Remember that piece of junk, right? Yeah,
Never
it's
heard
like
of it.
you have blocked out the pain.
Oh, yeah.
Well, with Fire, whatever, you get the drill, right? So a Chrome is the one I was looking for, a Chromebook. They would go to those stations with a literal checklist and then like load up the app and do the check, and I'm watching this and I asked the guy about the testers, and I said, how many testers do you have, because this was an expensive product. It was like $1,000 a license and things like that. I'm expensive for a company in India that's doing a lot of free things with Hotmail accounts. And then he goes 5,000, and the look on my face, and I'm not even the sales guy, right? Like I'm like,
What, in sales?
I was not in sales. I know. And so I'm not even the sales guy. I had the sales guy, Chris, with me from Texas. He was a character. But my face, right, was like, and then the guy already knew that, like, he goes, no, on this floor. So he already anticipated my next question. I'm like, so how many? He goes, 50,000. He goes, yeah, we have 50,000 testers here in Bangalore. I'm like, okay, let's talk about how you can automate. So what it turned out is they could actually do the record and then play back and then do all the the test scripts. Is they could actually reduce that down to like 5,000, and they're not testers, but they're scripting engineers. So we actually got in that way, and we're able to like roll up an enterprise license with all the developer tools. So as you get a little bigger and you increase he's got his t-shirt, but he works at the company, so he's alive. But as you kind of have some other avenues and your products expand, you can actually start to kind of string them together, right? And Microsoft's brilliant at this. There's a reason why Teams is like 12 times larger than Slack, right? Because Teams is included with every bundle of whatever it is they
12
sell.
times better, of course.
I think they both kind of stink, but that's a whole different story.
I'm being sarcastic, yeah.
I kind of picked that up.
You did.
Okay, so step one is top down, bottoms up, jab, 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 right hook or left hook, depending upon if you're watching at home. Step two, so we talked about this earlier. So step two, growing through partnerships. So in 2014, like 3 generations ago, you reached out to 2 unknown startups called AWS and Dropbox, who were new in dev tools, and you hustled your way in to speak to relevant people. I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder. No, okay, I'll let you do it.
You can.
Okay.
You tell better. You tell better.
I doubt that. So apparently, the way Steve got into AWS was that his ex-roommate at college, like 300 years ago.
I was in business school, so it wasn't that
long. Oh, okay. So 200 years ago was a
150.
150. All right, thank you. Was a high-up muckety-muck at Amazon, or knew someone who knew someone who. So Steve's takeaway was hustle your way in, and then I love this. On our chat this morning about what we're going to talk about. He said it's super easy to do business with big companies. Like, please explain that. From our company of 25 people, like, tell me how we can do business with big companies.
Oh, yeah, and I didn't even give you half of it on the phone call this morning, because literally at one point I had Microsoft being out of the palm of my hand, telling me what's not going to be in the next release of their product, saying, hint, hint, you build it, right, in your tools. So, but that's actually the moral of the story, is Big companies have a process, have a bureaucracy, but they have budget and they have the market share, right? So AWS discovered, wow, if we engage with it, we read Gary Vee's book, so maybe I'm like a shill for Gary tonight. I really
I
don't.
hope you get a kickback.
I get nothing.
Sale.
If anything, I'll give him money. I bought 1 or 2 of his books, right? So if anything, he should be paying me. But ultimately is they go out and say, all of a sudden it's like, we have to talk to developers, right? Let's go talk to developers. And then of course, what happens? They have this piece of enterprise software that takes 32 years to log in, right? I remember once waiting for a login, an OAuth login, and it took seriously 3 days on one of these tools. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This partner program is rubbish, right? So, and I remember even at Microsoft, they got so much feedback at the early days of Azure. Is Scott Guthrie, who's now the president of the Microsoft Dev division, took the whole Azure team, because it wasn't that big back then, to a hotel, in Vegas, but locked them in the hotel and gave them gift cards, the Azure gift cards, and said, okay, go build an app. I'll see you in the morning. And he went to Vegas.
Wow.
Right? And no one could build anything because it took 2 days to provision. So they literally sat in a hotel room for 2 days, right? He goes, okay, I'll go back and fix it. Right? I want to be able to, if I have a gift card for $100 of free Azure, I want to be able, so that's how broken big companies are. So I wasn't being facetious. It's actually very easy to do business with these big companies. Is you just go build something they need and tell them you built it and tell them, now you have to have done the jab, right hook and have a big developer community, right? Because we were probably 500,000 to 1 million developers in our ecosystem. That didn't mean all of them were customers. I mean, we were only about 80 to 100 million in revenue at the time. So we didn't have 100, it wasn't 1 million customers, but in the community, registered on the website, attended a webinar, that kind of a thing. So I said, hey, I've got this ecosystem of 1 million developers, and a lot of them are using AWS, and you need a connector to our tool. So we built it. And we want it to be able to be downloaded right from Amazon. And they're like, oh, well, there's this partner program. I'm not paying anything in your partner program, right? I said, I want you to put this on the AWS site so then people can download it. I said, because it's going to be on our site, right? And this is the part that scared them, but then they start thinking. I said, I'm going to put it on our site. And remember, I have 1 million developers. So they're going to come to our site. By definition, they're using our product if they're coming to our site, and they want to connect to your product. I go, so they're going to download our tool. I go, don't you think you kind of want to have a say in what I'm going to do with this tool? So, eventually, the best you can kind of get out of them is maybe a link on their site, or they might do a press release with you and things like that, right? So, in essence, you go and you build something. We did the same thing with Dropbox. Right? We went and we built something that connected them into our ecosystem. Now, the benefit for both Dropbox and AWS, we learned the lesson and carried it over to a company called Couchbase, which is the OG of the NoSQL databases, it's the big mama compared to MongoDB. And these companies kind of ignored Microsoft, and we had probably half our ecosystem was Microsoft.NET developers, or at least at least 300, 400,000 of them were .NET developers, if not 500,000 of them were. And so we would go build all the .NET connectors for these companies, and then put it on our website, because of course it connected to our tool. Now, technically they could have connected to our competitors' tools, right? But our competitors' customers, if our competitors' customers were coming to our site to download something, right, I'm okay with that, right? If you're paying our competitors money but using one of our free components, I'm okay with that. So ultimately, as we went to Couchbase and offered to build them the .NET connector, and that particular one, we had a little bit of an inside job, again, hustling to the right person. We were able to get right up to the CMO because he happened to be our ex-CMO, so that was actually a little easier, that one. But he already knew our strategy because he watched us do it, with AWS, with Dropbox. And so he was not my college roommate. Yeah, he's a little older than me. He comes from that Siebel, Oracle
definitely
background.
Low golf handicap.
Definitely, yeah. Probably none.
None.
Yeah, probably pro-ams with Tiger Woods or somebody, or I don't know who the golfers are these days. Though I did watch some of the Masters, and it was actually pretty epic. It was 2 guys into a bunker, and then both of them out of the bunker with a hole. I'm like, I don't really know golf, but I remember it was like spring break. I was in Hawaii at the gym, and I was watching. I don't really know golf, but I know that this is really important. I know what just happened because the whole place went nuts. And I back in the '90s, I used to be an independent dev, just selling my services by the hour, and I wrote a lot of software for the PGA. And I wrote their ticketing app and used to give me tickets. And it was like lost on me. Like I never, but one year I went because a buddy of mine said, oh, you have tickets to the PGA thing, let's go. And like, I didn't like it because like, I'm from New York, I'm just loud and talk a lot. And that's a no-no at golf events. Like I've been shushed in Madison Square Garden at a Ranger game. Like seriously, I was shushed once at Madison Square Garden. Like, I'm like, what are you talking about?
I've got to ask, when you built the ticketing system for the PGA, did you have a backdoor with password 123?
I did, but it was NY Mets was the password.
Right.
NY Mets 86. Any Met fans understand the 86 reference. So, ultimately is we went to these bigger companies and wrote something that, so it wasn't like I was going and building a tool for them. I was building a tool that connected their service to my service, and I also had like the million developers in my pocket that were gonna go use it. So like I was kind of like being a bully to some degree, right? But I was taking advantage, so by networking to the right people, right? And with LinkedIn and everything, it's not hard to find these people because again, like they go and hire somebody. Like the good news is they hire someone from the developer ecosystem, so you're probably only 1 degree of separation away from them, right? So they hire someone from the developer ecosystem. They're a relatively new hire. They've been given a budget, and they've had like OKRs, I forget, KPIs, like all the big companies have all those acronyms about like your salary, right? And their OKR, KPIs, blah, 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 says get a lot of developers onto the platform, right? So here you are, you're walking up to them with a pool of 1 million developers that want to be on their platform, right? So you just kind of solve the problem. I always would tell the staff, that we worked with, the folks at the company, I would say, the way you succeed is find out how the person you're talking to, like at AWS or Dropbox or these places, because we did a big deal with Google as well, find out how they get promoted, right? And solve that problem. Like find out what the metric is. Oh, you need to reach 10,000 developers a month. Let's not give them access to all 1 million of our developers on the first month. Let's dole it out over 12 months, right? We did a lot. We also built, we kind of beat our way to the door. We had an HTML5 JavaScript tool. Remember those? Those were fun, right? About 8 years ago, right, when that was a thing. I guess it's still kind of a thing. And Chrome OS was in dire straits, and they couldn't figure out how to talk to the hardware. And like, it was just opportunistic. I'm like, we do that all the time. I'm like, I've got like brainiacs in Bulgaria. We were a Bulgarian company. It was interesting. It was me and like 4 Bulgarians running the show. It was a lot of fun. And a couple other Americans joined the fun later on. And but I had these really, really smart guys that totally could do these hacks to talk to the hardware. So again, a camera has to talk to the hardware, save this, that, the other thing. So we basically just wrote like a camera app and gave it to them. And then eventually, like, money exchanged hands, and they actually, like, hired us to go build pieces of Chrome OS. But what we did is we converted that, instead of, like, we took a much lower pay, and we wanted 2 things. The first was the About box, and I forget, it was probably for about 36 months, or about 3 years. When you went to the camera on Chrome OS, when you had a new Chromebook, and went to About, it would actually be the .NET Ninja would come, or actually, this one was it was called Kendo UI, so it was a Kendo Warrior, right? So our logo would come up, say Telerik, Kendo UI, with a link to our website. And we also wanted to be able to demo it on stage at I/O, right? Their big developer conference, right? And what more credibility do you need than being introduced by like the CTO of Google to go demo something on Chrome OS? Because again, we chose a product, like these big companies do really silly things. Like on Facebook, I'm gonna make a phone. On Amazon, I'm gonna make a phone. But they have budgets of like 10 times more your revenue. So you just go and say, I'll build something. Oh, we built something for Facebook too. Like I forget what it was. It was a Windows client. Did you know Facebook had a Windows client? A native Windows client? We built it for them. Right? I'm going to say it had 50,000 downloads. There's only 1 billion users, right? So it's a 0.00000000005%, right? But we built it for them, relatively for free, right? And we actually got Microsoft to pay. That's a whole different story. We used it because it was a Windows client, so we used whatever new, we just look for people with budget, right? And these things. So it's relatively straightforward to kind of hack your way into those scenarios.
Okay. So if you don't have 1.5 million developers to wave under their nose, do you build an integration, but you only
A
have
lot of followers on Twitter.
Followers on
You
Twitter.
don't necessarily need the 1.5 million developers.
You don't need the 1.5 million developers necessarily as part of your ecosystem. As long as your ecosystem is strong, you have lots of followers that are vocal and influential. It doesn't have to be that large. Like remember, this was all 10 years ago before some of the more modern, social media connectivity tools and things like that.
Okay, all right. So it's just
reach. You've got reach that
need
you
to
bring
reach-
them.
Reach
Got
and
it.
influence.
Got it. Okay, step number 3, and this is a little bit more bringing everything current. So you had lessons from the developer community
about building communities and building value, and you took it to Fresco Capital, and you used it in building up your ecosystem of entrepreneurs and adding value to portfolio companies. So tell us the story of Pipedrive and your oversized influence on the company and their $1.5 billion IPO.
Okay, great. Yeah, and one of the things is I learned as things do translate is one of our first portfolio companies was right here in San Francisco, was in EdTech. And the guy was asking me for like, how do we sell to districts and schools and this, and I actually described the bottom-up, top-down approach to him, right? Like, because give the tool free to the teachers, right? The teachers use it, then you go to the district and you tell them all your teachers are using it, right? That kind of a thing. So I was surprised that actually translated. I totally won it. I walked into the meeting like, I can't get any value to this guy. I'm just gonna buy the coffee and like let him talk, right? And then when I walked out, I'm like doing the whole top down and going pretty nuts. Like, wow, developer marketing and evangelism and community actually translates into non-developer tools as well. But Pipedrive was an interesting one, and maybe the Moesif employees don't want to hear this story. We were big.
They want to hear.
Okay, cool. Well, you know it.
I know it.
You actually.
Yeah,
this is the one story. Like, I didn't tell him the Elon Musk jokes. Like, I didn't. Or the Gary Vee joke. That was all new. Yeah.
But this story I heard, and you want to hear it.
Okay, so Pipedrive, for those of you not familiar, is a mid-market CRM that targets younger agile companies, right? So it's very flexible. And the knock I'll have, Rangar. Well, they're based in Estonia, so Rangar is not listening right now on YouTube because he's literally driving buses into Ukraine to drop off supplies back to Tallinn and back. Yeah, so he's been going back and forth. It's amazing what he's been doing. So I can say whatever I want because he's not listening. Yeah, he's busy doing more important stuff. So long story short is we're an early investor in Pipedrive, and we're a firm believer, and they had a really bad UI, like really bad. Because people didn't care, because it was a fraction of the price of Salesforce and completely customizable. So they had a problem of, they were targeting companies like Moesif or the folks that have shown up here, like your size of a company. They weren't targeting these large enterprises that had like a budget of millions of dollars for integration and all these other systems. So they had to make it super, super simple to do integration. So, and they had a clunky UX because they focused more on the back end of the integration and things like that. So they made it really easy for small companies to integrate. And not quite no code. I mean, you had to write a little bit of code, but you get your developer, your API token, you do your magic. So I'm playing around with this, and we're trying to be the good investor. We are going to eat our own dog food. We are going to use Pipedrive for better or for worse. Now let me tell you, any of you aspiring venture capitalists out there, don't use Pipedrive to run your business, right? I joke, we still use Pipedrive, and we're paying them money because we're not their investor anymore. We exited the company, right? So now we're paying for the product. I keep telling my partners, like, we don't need to use Pipedrive anymore. Like, the exit was a year ago, right? But so we were good investors. We were using the company product, and we gave them a lot of feedback because, as I said, we weren't integrating. But then I said, well, why aren't we? Like, our tools, we were a very distributed team at the time. We had 2 in San Francisco and 2 in Hong Kong. And, so we're young little startup. This is probably like 5-6 years ago. Startup VC, I guess you can call us. And I was like, what is really our tooling stack? Like, it's these mishmash of SaaS tools, right? And one of them, of course, was Slack. And, well, I felt like every time, if I went and visited, here's an introduction to a really cool dev tools shop called Moesif, right? So I go meet the founder.
Good plug.
Derek.
I like that.
I like that.
Good
You like
plug.
that plug? Yeah, making it relevant. Making it relevant.
Very nice. Thank you.
And I would, so Derek, this is what happened after you left the coffee bar that day. I went back home, because he actually met me in Menlo Park, not at our office up here. And I opened up Pipedrive, and I created a new record called Moesif. And I put in the size of the investment, the stage of the company. I wrote up information about the company. I think I probably had a deck. I put the deck in. I typed, all the CRM stuff. And then what did I do? How did I communicate that and my excitement about just communicate the fact that I met this company to my team? Well, the only way I could do that is then take a link to the Pipedrive record and email it to them or Slack it to them, right? I thought that was pretty lame. I'm lazy. Right, and I always make the argument, like, I felt like I was a good developer. I don't know, the jury's still out. Right? I thought I was a good developer because I was a lazy developer. If I did something more than once, I wanted to automate it, right? Or build a routine that I call it again. So I never wanted to write the same type of code more than once, right? And so I said, well, what if I just went into their API? I'm sure they have an integration with Slack, They didn't. So I, of course, they were building a developer ecosystem, so they kept asking me all these questions. I was telling them top down, bottoms up, sounded like a broken record, right? But they were executing on that pretty flawlessly. So they were building the whole jab, right hook thing. Like they were masters of creating content. Just about they were not selling. They were using that methodology not just for the developer ecosystem, but to the salespeople that they were targeting. And they were just like doing seminars on how to close deals. And never mentioned Pipedrive. It was literally like the Telerik model just for CRM. And then they did the same thing on their developer ecosystem. So I asked them to build a Slack bot, and they were like, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll put it on the we'll put it on the roadmap." Right? I thought hey, I'm literally your first non-Estonian investor. Right? We were $100,000 check into their $1 million seed round. In 2013 or something like that, right?
How much did they eventually raise in all of their funding?
Oh, more than the size of our fund. I think eventually over the years was about 100 million or more, right? I mean, that's nothing in today's dollars, right? But you have to, add crypto and dog years to that, right? The equivalent today of 3 billion, right? So, by this point they were big. They even had a building in Estonia with their name on it. So I think that's big, right? If it's just, Moesif has this nice floor, but your name isn't outside, right?
We're working on it.
You're working on it,
We're
okay.
working on it.
It just says it says for lease, to be honest.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's going to be cut from the YouTube, by the way.
Leave that in hashtag for lease, hashtag,
don't listen to
hashtag cancel Dilbert. So long story short is I went and built that said bot.
You personally built it?
I personally built it. It's not that hard. It's HTML5 JavaScript. I mean, come on. It's really straightforward. You get a developer token. It was real simple, actually. And testament to them for having a really easy way to do it. But negative to them for not building it and making it like a button click and just integrate with Slack. Super simple. So I built it. And I did two things. Thing number one, I wrote a blog post to shame them. Thing number two, I put it on GitHub and I signed it. I transferred the ownership to them, right, to their lead developer. Thing number three, sent a message to the CEO with a link to the blog post, who of course loved it. He's like, "Oh, this is amazing! Thanks. Our VC is actually adding to our product for us for free. That's totally awesome, right?" I should have got an extra share or something, but I didn't. I should have asked. I didn't ask. You have to ask for things in life. So then, the relationship obviously got a lot deeper after. Now the tech team probably didn't talk to me for a really long time. I mean, I learned the curse words in Estonian pretty fast because I knew my name. I knew when I heard Steven and then So a few months later, they hired this really awesome dude. He was just an interesting guy. And he was open to a lot of things. And I kept telling him how he needed to go to India because we had a big presence in India. And I said, "You need to go to India. You'll get eaten up in India. And it's funny. I literally planted him in a coffee shop for folks who are watching in India, Cafe Coffee Day, right? And I planted him in a coffee shop, and I set up 5 meetings for him. But I had meetings with startups that were coming to pitch me. Every one of the startups that pitched me used Pipedrive because they go, "Oh, who's your friend over there?" I'm like, "Oh, that's Aro. He's at Pipedrive." So then he literally doubled the size of his meetings. So all those people came back to talk to him because he was doing the business. So they did the bottoms up approach in India without even trying, meaning it just organically. They had thousands of customers in India, right? But I convinced him, or I bullied him, to do a hackathon on the Pipedrive tools. And I just chose the 4 or 5 features that really kind of pissed me off about the product. And I unleashed 500 developers. And I just said to Pipedrive, just put $1,000 cash prize. I forget what it was. It was maybe it was 1 million rupees or something. I chose a big number in the local currency, but it was 3 decimal places off. So it was $1,000, right? It was 1 lakh of the rupees or something, right? So I just chose the categories for the prizes to be the product features I didn't like. And so the business development guy at Pipedrive had no idea what I was doing, but I was basically doing the same exact strategy that I did to Amazon and all the other ones, right? Is I was bringing my ecosystem right up to them and driving product that way. So I feel like you got to put your money where your mouth is.
That's pretty good. That's a good story.
That's a very good story of adding value as a VC. It's you try. Yeah, that's. I don't want to say anything more.
Our integration.
You guys already have good integration. That's a problem.
Just for those at home, the CEO asked, "Where's our integration?"
So this
I'll get on it.
Yeah, he's a good coder, apparently, or so he says. So this is where we open up the floor to questions from Shin, the co-founder, who always has 9 questions to ask.
Who also worked at Microsoft. So
Who also worked at Microsoft.
He knows all the secrets. He knows all the secrets.
Right. I was actually joking. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But if anyone has any questions, this is the question time. Yes, the illustrious Nate from the front row.
Thank you.
I'll repeat the question, then you answer it, because I
I'm
don't
not
know
gonna pay
anything.
attention. I'm not going to pay attention to what
Okay,
you asked.
all
I'm
right.
just going to daydream. And then...
Okay, good. Go ahead.
You mentioned earlier, but what are DevRel people KPI'd on?
Great question.
So the question is, what are DevRel people KPI'd on? Is that KPIs and OKRs or just KPIs?
Same difference.
Okay, good.
It's just gobbledygook, pointy hair.
TLA, 3-letter abbreviation.
Hashtag bad management. Yeah, that's a great baseline question, right? Like you're going to spend money on these people. How do you actually evaluate them and see if they're doing a good job? So almost exclusively is reach, but it's got to be then the reach of this market segment that you're looking at. So in our case, I told you we had the market segmented into 3 segmentation, right? Mort. I've merged Mort and Elvis together. It must be a crypto thing. So Mort, Elvis, and Einstein. And predominantly our biggest customer from a spend point of view was Elvis, but our volume of customer at a lower tier was Mort, and Mort's led to more Elvises in their organizations. So we would evaluate the DevRel on what the reach was to the segment that we were looking for, and then as we got a little more in the early days, that's all we cared about, because we were just trying to get qualified people into the ecosystem. As we developed the ecosystem, got a little more sophisticated. We had a little bit more of a matrix. Sometimes it was segmented by products. So some folks would be responsible to get so almost back to the basics of just getting word out about a brand new product. Like if you just invented a brand new product, ABC, XYZ, no one's ever heard of it. So you want by the end of the month 100,000 people to hear of it. We never tied sales metrics back to the developers, right? And the reason for that is that was the sales team's job, right? So DevRel truly was community and brand marketing. It was not tied to sales. What we did later is just to kind of see, as a company progresses, as we had geographies involved. In some of our geographies, like Australia, for example, and we had a head of DevRel there who came from Microsoft. He then would go as a technical account manager and work on some of the larger deals with the salesperson. So go in and do a little proof of concept, might spend a week at a potential, maybe not a week, but spend a few days at a customer site, or potential customer site, things like that. We tried not to tie that in, because whenever you bring revenue into it, people then incentives start changing. To give you a quick example, there was this one time where something very controversial happened in the developer ecosystem, because that never happens. Right, like tabs, spaces, like something as silly as tabs and spaces, right? I remember watching that episode of Silicon Valley, and my wife asked me, "Is that a thing?" I go, "Holy, what bad word is that a thing?" I wrote a blog post that responded and took a very strong stand, and it really had not much to do with the company. And I got an email a month later that said and my blog post, which was always because I had my own blog, hosted blog. I never blogged on the company website, and my co-founders hated that. They're like, you have to blog on Telerik.com. But they said that free downloads that had a referral from that blog post that converted into a download that converted into a sell was something like $800,000. And I joked and said, I don't have to work the rest of the year. I wrote one blog post. Right? So obviously you can misalign incentives if you start, because reach can be so enormous. And the developers are compensated on a different type of schedule than, let's say, a salesperson that's being commission-based. You almost never put in sales metrics. You might put other marketing metrics, but it's almost always some type of reach or some type of touch points to customers. We don't necessarily count blog posts. We came up with a formula that kind of measured reach. As I said, as we got more sophisticated, an individual manager might work in DevRel and say, well, spread your reach out, like one conference, one user group, 6 blog posts, these videos, that kind of thing. But yeah. Cool.
So probably the summary takeaway is be very data driven.
Yes.
Don't
follow sales incentives for the DevRel team. So I'm talking to you now, Matt and Dylan. You're going to miss out.
Okay, Matt and Dylan.
Matt and Dylan in DevRel. But that's great. Okay, good question. Any? Oh yes, our illustrious Savannah from the crack marketing team of Moesif. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm jumping off of Nate's question here about evaluation. I was wondering, if you are communicating DevRel's results to a stakeholder that doesn't understand what DevRel is or what DevRel does, how do you approach that?
Okay, so the question I think is, if you're communicating DevRel
Like if you're trying to share
KPIs.
KPIs is a great place, yeah. So if you're trying to share what DevRel has accomplished to someone else in the company that may not know what DevRel actually is, how would you communicate that?
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I get it. So how do you communicate the KPIs or the results of DevRel to someone else in the company who's never heard of DevRel and doesn't know you, Matt and Dylan, over there at home, watching in London, Ontario?
Okay, yes, that's another very popular problem or question, right, that I'll get. And it's a challenge, right? So in essence, when you are communicating back to people, to stakeholders that don't understand, and a lot of times it could be the CEO, it could be if you are the CEO, it could be your board of directors or your dark side venture capitalists or your Dilbert, hashtag cancel Dilbert. Do we have to cancel the pointy haired boss though? Is he
I don't think so.
is he using profanity on
Just-
Twitter?
Well, it wasn't profanity. It was he had some weird comments about being held up at gunpoint and stuff.
Yeah,
which wasn't good.
I can imagine. Anyway, we digress.
We do.
Um,
But I'm sure the audience is loving it.
I hope so. They're smiling, or maybe it could be being polite.
Right.
But ultimately is the stakeholders that don't necessarily understand, you have to then tie it in as a supporting staff. I'm sorry, as a supporting, so like if you go back to the Academy Awards, you have like the best actor, best actress, and best supporting actors, best supporting actress. So you say, so DevRel is a cost center, right? If you want to start getting really specific and using gap accounting type things, right? It's a cost center similar to our marketing and marketing campaigns, right? So then marketing campaigns are usually then measured in similar metrics, but then are tied to how successful that campaign was to conversions. So then for folks that are really data-driven and nerdy, is you start saying, well, what is the cost of top of funnel, right? So we spent exactly 0 on our top of funnel, right? So when we went into accounting, and I remember explaining this to our VCs that didn't know what they were, didn't know what we were doing, at board meetings. You then go in and say, well, traditionally we'd be spending, X million dollars on top of funnel. And we're spending close to 0 on top of funnel because, that cost center is accounted for over there. So in essence, you classify it as something different. Again, not back to your question, not necessarily revenue. You can if it's part of a chain. So we actually, I remember we had these charts, or not charts, boxes with lines, right? So the box was DevRel with an arrow, and then it was marketing funnel, right? Then we had all the gates of the marketing funnel, and our ultimate conversion rate was about 4%, right? So we built a $100 million business on a 4% conversion rate.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it was a big funnel. It was a big funnel. And then sales, right? And then, the other thing is that I turned around, and this was a little more subjective. My CFO used to blast me all the time. He goes, we made our money on bundles on an annual subscription. So our product was $899. And we had 25 products. So the price of a second product was $899, or you can buy all of them for $1,700. Because I wanted you to have all the products. So I literally had people that their only job was to get our customers to use the products they've paid for. So meaning is, I had a statistic that said, you've bought this product, you've bought the bundle and you're using one product, you've never downloaded the other 19. So I had people, DevRel people, that their sole purpose of function when they came to work every day was to get our existing customers to download the other 19 products and give them a try.
Upsell. I like that.
Right. And I called it, granted, I might have went to business school, but I didn't learn a lot because I was hanging out with my degenerate roommate, who eventually went to work at AWS and helped me out, but he was a degenerate at the time. So I missed that day in marketing. So I just called it defending the renewal, right? Because our renewal rate was only about 70%. And what did I know about SaaS business when I'm 22 years old or whatever? My CFO just kept saying, that's horrible. I'm 70%? That's amazing. That's 30% churn. Probably my VCs were probably laughing at me when I thought that was good. See, Derek, I've come a long way. So now I'm 30%. We're not investing in that company.
Right.
So in essence, even though it was subjective, I said that number is getting better every year, and the only reason is because we're using DevRel to actually reinforce those products, right? So it was very hard from a KPI, but the KPI was impressions, and we had some what I call outside and inside DevRel, and the inside DevRel were evangelizing to our existing customers, right? So it wasn't a sales pitch, so it was just more of the same, right?
So the takeaway to your question, I think, Savannah, let me paraphrase the last 10 minutes.
Come on,
Was,
it was 5 minutes.
okay, 5 minutes, whatever. Was that
30% churn is bad.
30% churn is bad. You want to aim for 150% churn, right, Derek? 150%. The other takeaway was explain DevRel to the upper management as a magic team of people who can bring more revenue to the company. That was my takeaway. And my number two takeaway...
The supporting staff to
The supporting staff. And my other takeaway was, which I almost fell off my chair hearing, was that the budget spent on top of funnel can be written off somewhere else.
Yeah.
So as Mr. Marketing, I love that.
You just pass that budget, cost center.
We've got the sales guy here, we've got the engineering guy
Sales
here.
guy.
They're both, and I love this. So I can pass my budget of top of funnel over to
Okay.
Nigel, Praveen. That's fantastic. I love
Go
it.
Nigel.
Okay. All right. Any other loaded questions?
Oh, you planted those.
I did. No, I didn't. I didn't plant those questions. Well, we've sort of used up all of our time. The thing to end on, I think, is a little anecdotal story that you all didn't know, that in the Forte household, on Thursdays, it's pizza night.
It is pizza night.
Steve-
I'm missing pizza night. But you guys serve me pizza.
Right, and you said that with a smile. So when he told me that, I was very upset because I said, oh, should we change the meal? He said, no, I don't mind. But he could have done pizza night at home, or he could do pizza night with us. So I'm very glad, Steve, that you did pizza night with us.
What you didn't tell them, I didn't tell you, is
I'm the one cooking the pizza because I grill it in the backyard. So I actually,
Oh.
so yeah, my wife just took my daughter out to dinner tonight. So
Oh,
yeah. So I actually got off the hook cooking.
Right. Well, a round of applause for Steve, the non-cook for tonight.